The 6-ton desert heist, the casino millionaire who buried his fortune. Act 1. The Bloodline of Glitter Gulch. The midday glare of the Mojave Desert does not merely warm the skin. It presses against the chest like a physical weight, bleaching the asphalt until the distant horizon shimmers like open water. But step beneath the block-long, neon-canopied ceiling of Fremont Street and pass through the glass doors of Binion's Horseshoe Casino, and the blinding sun vanishes. It is replaced by a perpetual twilight smelling of heavy tobacco smoke, stale bourbon, cheap steak specials, and the rhythmic, metallic clatter of thousands of slot machine trays. This was Glitter Gulch, the unpolished, high-rolling, dangerous heart of old Las Vegas. And by the late 1990s, the undisputed, chaotic prince of this realm was Lonnie Theodore Ted Binion. Ted was Las Vegas royalty, though he wore the crown with deliberate, rough-edged defiance. To understand the madness that consumed his final years, one must understand the man who built the empire, his father, Lester Benny Binion. Benny was a legendary Texas gangster who had ruled the underground gambling dens of Dallas in the 1930s and 40s. He was a man who viewed the law as a minor inconvenience and personal loyalty as the ultimate currency. When the Texas Rangers and rival syndicates made Dallas too hot to handle, Benny loaded suitcases literal filled with cold cash into his vehicle and fled west to Nevada. In 1951, Benny opened the Horseshoe Casino. He didn't build a palace with fountains or European statues, he built a gambler's casino. Benny pioneered the revolutionary concept that if you want to get rich, you have to make the little people feel big and the big people feel like gods. The Horseshoe became famous for a simple, terrifyingly lucrative premise: no limits on bets. If a gambler walked in off the street with $1 million in cash, the Horseshoe would book the wager without blinking. To prove his financial might, Benny encased 100 pristine, sequential $10,000 bills in a giant, horseshoe-shaped glass display on the casino floor. It became a holy pilgrimage site for tourists who just wanted to stare at $1 million in cash. Benny ruled his casino with a velvet glove and an iron fist. If a cheat was caught at the Horseshoe, they weren't handed over to the police. They were dragged into the back alleys by Benny's trusted Texan enforcers and beaten until they could no longer walk. Benny himself famously admitted to killing several men in self-defense during his lifetime, keeping a pearl-handled revolver tucked into his waistband even while walking his own casino floor. Ted grew up in the shadow of this violent, high-stakes mythology. Born in 1943, he spent his childhood running through the counting rooms and back offices of the Horseshoe. He possessed his father's sharp mind for gaming mathematics, a photographic memory for faces, and an innate, cynical understanding of human greed. He knew how to spot a card counter from 50 paces and could calculate the house edge on a complex craps wager in a fraction of a second. But as the decades rolled on, Ted also inherited the dark, lawless impulses of the family lineage. While his older brother, Jack Binion, became the stable, corporate face of the casino, Ted became its wild, unpredictable engine. By his late 40s, Ted was a walking contradiction that fascinated and terrified the city. He was a multi-millionaire casino executive, yet he looked like a disheveled desert prospector who had wandered out of the hills. He disdained tailored suits, preferring grease-stained jeans, faded flannel shirts, and worn cowboy boots. He drove a beat-up silver pickup truck with empty soda cans, dog hair, and thousands of dollars in loose, crumpled $100 bills rolling around on the floorboards. Beneath the eccentric exterior, however, lay a deeply fractured psyche. Ted had developed a severe, consuming addiction to black tar heroin and Xanax. He didn't just use drugs, he lived in a haze of profound, weaponized paranoia. He began associating with known members of organized crime and street gangs, viewing them as a personal security force. In a city like Las Vegas, which in the 1990s was desperately trying to scrub away its blood-soaked mob-era image to attract Wall Street investors and family tourists, Ted Binion was a glaring, dangerous liability. The Nevada Gaming Control Board placed him under constant surveillance. They documented his meetings with mob figures, his erratic behavior on the casino floor, and his failing drug tests. Finally, in May of 1998, the Nevada Gaming Commission had seen enough. In a historic, crushing blow, they stripped Ted of his gaming license and banned him from even setting foot inside the casino his own family built. Cut off from the casino floor, Ted retreated to his palatial, walled estate on Palomino Lane. He was a man adrift. He possessed tens of millions of dollars in liquid wealth, a devastating chemical dependency, and an overwhelming, drug-fueled terror that the government, IRS agents, or corporate rivals were plotting to strip him of his remaining fortune. He decided that banks were traps and corporate vaults were compromises. He needed to hide his wealth where only he could touch it, out in the unforgiving desert sand. Act 2, The Underground Fortress. In the burning spring of 1998, Ted Binion finalized his plan to disappear his fortune from the financial grid. He owned a barren, sagebrush-choked acreage in Pahrump, Nevada, a desolate, dusty valley about 60 miles west of Las Vegas across the Sprung Mountains, known primarily for its legal brothels, off-grid residents, and vast stretches of empty space. To build his desert fortress, Ted hired a smooth-talking, 33-year-old contractor from Montana named Rick Tabish. Tabish was everything Ted was not: young, physically imposing, highly charismatic, and meticulously groomed. But beneath Tabish's ambitious exterior lay a mountain of crushing financial debt. He ran a struggling trucking and construction operation, and when he looked at Ted Binion, he didn't see an eccentric employer. He saw a golden ticket to absolute financial freedom. Together, the millionaire and the contractor executed an operation straight out of an old West dime novel. Ted emptied his personal, deep-reserve vaults at the Horseshoe. This wasn't paper fiat money. It was wealth you could physically break your back trying to lift. The haul consisted of nearly 6 tons of pure silver bullion, massive 1,000-ounce industrial silver bars, crates of high-denomination casino chips, and a legendary, historic collection of over 100,000 rare coins. Among them were thousands of uncirculated Carson City silver dollars, minted over a century prior, preserved perfectly in their original mint bags. Under the absolute cover of a moonless desert night, Tabish and a select crew of heavy machinery operators dug a massive, 12-foot-deep trench into the sun-baked earth of the Pahrump lot. They poured thick, steel-reinforced concrete walls to create an underground bunker. Atop this subterranean vault, they installed a massive, industrial steel safe door, securing it with heavy-duty combinations. They lowered the 6 tons of silver inside, backfilled the trench with tons of desert gravel, and smoothed the topsoil. To any truck driver or tourist passing by on the lonely desert highway, it looked like an abandoned construction site. In reality, it was a modern-day treasure chest buried in the sand, worth a conservative $6 million. Only a tight circle of individuals knew the exact coordinates of the Pahrump bunker. Ted kept the master keys and combinations locked away at Palomino Lane, while Rick Tabish held the structural blueprints. But Rick Tabish had also found another, far more intimate entry point into Ted Binion's life. Her name was Sandy Murphy. Sandy was a 26-year-old former upscale club dancer who had met Ted a few years earlier at a local adult entertainment venue. Attracted by his staggering wealth and wild lifestyle, she had moved into the Palomino Lane mansion, quickly transforming into his live-in girlfriend. She lived a life of unchecked luxury, utilizing Ted's unlimited credit cards to buy designer clothing, fine jewelry, and luxury vehicles. But the domestic life on Palomino Lane was far from a fairy tale. Ted's heroin-fueled mood swings made him erratic and verbally abusive. He would lock himself in his den for days, high on smokable black tar heroin, surrounded by loaded firearms and spiraling into a deep state of terror. Somewhere in this chaotic vortex of wealth and paranoia, Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish crossed paths. The mutual attraction was instantaneous, fueled by youth, intense ambition, and a cold, shared realization. They were both catering to an unstable, agging millionaire who was rapidly destroying himself. They began a passionate, clandestine love affair. They would meet in luxury boutique hotels outside of Las Vegas, while Ted sat oblivious in his mansion, numbed by narcotics. As the blistering summer of 1998 bled into September, the fog of Ted's addiction briefly cleared. He began to notice the strange absences, the whispers, and the sudden, unexplained intimacy between his girlfriend and his contractor. On September 16, a furious Ted phoned his estate attorney, James J. Brown. His instructions were cold, calculated, and final. Take Sandy out of the will. If I'm dead, you'll know why. He never got the chance to sign the paperwork. Act 3, The Shadow of Death. On the afternoon of September 17, 1998, a frantic, hysterical call shattered the calm of the Las Vegas Police Department's dispatch room. Sandy Murphy was on the line, her voice screeching in terror, weeping that her boyfriend wasn't breathing and that she needed an ambulance immediately. When first responders pulled through the secure gates of the Palomino Lane estate, they found a quiet, eerie scene. Ted Binion was lying flat on his back on a mattress laid directly on the floor of his wood-paneled den. He was completely unresponsive. On a nightstand next to his cold body sat an empty, amber prescription bottle of Xanax and a small, neat plastic container that had recently held high-grade heroin. To the initial patrol officers and the responding medical examiner, the scene read like a textbook tragedy. Ted Binion was a notorious high-profile addict who had simply pushed his tolerance past the breaking point. It was sad, but in a city built on excess, it was entirely common. The death was initially classified as an accidental, self-inflicted drug overdose. But Ted's sister, Becky Binion, adamantly refused to accept the narrative. She knew her brother's survival instincts. She knew his street-smart cynicism, and she knew the predators that had been circling his fortune since he lost his gaming license. She immediately hired aggressive private investigators, blocked Sandy Murphy from accessing the estate, and demanded that the Las Vegas homicide unit look past the surface of the scene. The investigators didn't have to wait long for a smoking gun. It materialized exactly 36 hours later, in the dead of night, out in the lonely desert expanse of Pahrump. At roughly 2:00 a.m., a Nye County Sheriff's deputy was driving his routine patrol along the dark, unlit desert highway when he noticed something highly unusual. Powerful floodlights were cutting through the dark on Ted Binion's vacant property, and the heavy diesel roar of an excavator was echoing across the valley. The deputy killed his high beams, pulled his cruiser onto the dirt lot, and stepped out into the dust. There, standing directly over the unearthed, open concrete bunker, was Rick Tabish and two of his trusted construction employees. They had already used the heavy machinery to rip the steel vault door open and had successfully loaded several massive 1,000-ounce silver bars into the bed of a commercial dump truck. Tabish raised his hands, completely unbothered by the arrival of law enforcement. He spun a smooth, confident narrative. He explained to the deputy that he was Ted Binion's closest confidant. He claimed that before his tragic death, Ted had explicitly instructed him that if anything ever happened to him, Tabish needed to drive to Pahrump immediately, dig up the silver, and secure it before Ted's greedy, estranged family could seize it. The deputy, looking at the heavy machinery operating under the cover of darkness just hours after the property owner's body had gone cold, wasn't buying a single word. Tabish and his crew were ordered to the ground and arrested on the spot for grand larceny. When Las Vegas homicide detectives received the teletype that the man sleeping with the dead millionaire's girlfriend had been caught red-handed excavating $6 million in silver from a secret desert grave, the accidental overdose theory dissolved completely. A full-scale murder investigation was launched. Act 4, The Trap is Sprung. The arrest of Rick Tabish out in the Pahrump Desert blew the case wide open, forcing the Las Vegas Police Department to completely re-examine everything that had occurred inside the Palomino Lane mansion. Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Larry Sims was pressured to take a much closer look at Ted Binion's remains. What he discovered, upon a secondary, microscopic examination, shattered the illusion of a peaceful, self-inflicted overdose. Dr. Sims found tiny, pinpoint blood spots known as petechial hemorrhages beneath Ted's eyelids. These tiny ruptures occur when blood vessels burst due to intense, localized pressure, a classic hallmark of asphyxiation. Furthermore, when the body was turned over, closer inspection revealed faint, easily missed abrasions and tiny contusions on the bridge of Ted's nose and around the outer margins of his lips. There were also deep tissue bruises on his chest and shoulders that had not been immediately visible during the rushed initial assessment. While the toxicology report confirmed a staggering, lethal quantity of heroin and Xanax in his bloodstream, the physical trauma suggested a far more violent, manual intervention. The prosecution began to formulate a chilling, meticulous theory of the crime known as burking. Named after William Burke, a notorious 19th-century serial killer who murdered vulnerable victims in Edinburgh to sell their clean corpses to medical schools, burking is a highly calculated method of assassination. The killers first intoxicate or heavily sedate their target, rendering them completely incapable of fighting back. Once the victim is semi-conscious or paralyzed by drugs, the killers position themselves directly on top of the victim's chest, using their full body weight to compress the lungs and prevent the ribcage from expanding. Simultaneously, they place a hand or a soft object firmly over the nose and mouth. It is a terrifyingly efficient method of murder. It leaves almost no broken bones, no deep strangulation marks, and minimal external bruising, effectively mimicking a natural respiratory failure or overdose while silently suffocating the victim from the outside. As homicide detectives built their case, the financial pieces began to fall into place. Investigators discovered that just weeks before his death, Rick Tabish had been facing severe financial ruin. His construction company was hemorrhaging cash. He owed hundreds of thousands of dollars to local creditors, and a bank was preparing to foreclose on his equipment. He desperately needed millions of dollars, and he needed them immediately. Then came the digital breakthrough, phone records and secret wiretaps. The FBI, which had already been monitoring several organized crime figures in the Las Vegas area, had intercepted a series of highly suspicious cellular transmissions. Detectives analyzed the call logs between Rick Tabish and Sandy Murphy on the day leading up to Ted's death. The frequency of the calls was staggering. On September 17, the very afternoon Ted died, phone records showed Tabish's cell phone pinging off towers near the Palomino Lane estate at the exact times Sandy claimed she was alone, waiting for Ted to wake up. Even more damning were the statements gathered from Ted's household staff. The estate maid testified that in the days leading up to the tragedy, Sandy had been acting strangely, asking detailed questions about when the staff would be leaving the house for the weekend. A local drug dealer also stepped forward, admitting under oath that he had supplied Sandy Murphy with an unusually large quantity of liquid Xanax and high-grade heroin just 48 hours before Ted's heart stopped beating. The final piece of the puzzle arrived from Ted's financial records. Investigators discovered that a massive cash withdrawal of nearly $200,000 had been made from Ted's accounts just days prior. The physical cash was completely missing from the home. Combined with Ted's urgent, final phone call to his attorney ordering Sandy to be removed from his multi-million-dollar will, the motive was undeniable. The window of opportunity was closing. If Sandy and Rick didn't strike immediately, they would be left with nothing. In June of 1999, after months of gathering forensic, circumstantial, and telephonic evidence, the state of Nevada struck back. Rick Tabish and Sandy Murphy were officially arrested and indicted by a grand jury for the first-degree murder, burglary, and grand larceny of Lonnie Theodore, Ted Binion. Act 5, the first trial. The trial, which officially commenced in March of 2000 at the Clark County Courthouse, quickly became an absolute media circus. It was broadcast live, cover to cover, on court TV, transforming a real-world murder trial into a high-stakes, real-time daytime soap opera that captivated millions of viewers across the United States. Las Vegas had not seen a spectacle of this magnitude since the days of the mob hearings. The prosecution team, led by a fierce and meticulous district attorney, painted a vivid, damning portrait of a cold-blooded, avaricious young couple driven by pure, unadulterated greed. They presented a mountain of circumstantial evidence, weaving together the secret love affair, Rick Tabish's catastrophic debts, and the midnight raid on the Pahrump silver vault. The state brought forth their star medical witness, Dr. Larry Sims, who walked the jury through the mechanics of burking. Using graphic autopsy photographs, the prosecution argued that Sandy and Rick had waited until the household staff had departed, slipped a massive, incapacitating dose of Xanax into Ted's drinks. And then, once he was helpless, Tabish had pinned the millionaire to the mattress while Sandy assisted in suffocating him. To seal the narrative, the prosecution called Ted's estate attorney, James J. Brown, to the stand. Brown's testimony was explosive. He recounted with chilling clarity the phone call he received from Ted on September 16, less than 24 hours before his death. He told the jury how Ted's voice sounded tense and sober as he gave the explicit directive, "Take Sandy out of the will. If I'm dead, you'll know why." This, the prosecution argued, was Ted signing his own death warrant. The moment Sandy realized the gravy train was ending, the murder plot was accelerated. The defense team, however, launched a ferocious, scorched-earth counter-offensive. They sought to dismantle the prosecution's case by shifting the entire focus onto Ted Binion's extreme, self-destructive lifestyle. They portrayed Ted not as a victim of a sophisticated murder plot, but as a tragic, terminal addict whose reckless chemical dependency had finally caught up with him. The defense called a succession of local street characters, private bodyguards, and associates who painted a dark picture of life inside the Palomino Lane mansion. Witnesses testified that Ted didn't just use drugs. He consumed them in quantities that would kill an ordinary human being. They described how he would smoke pure, black tar heroin for 18 hours straight, washing it down with handfuls of prescription Xanax pills to manage his crushing paranoia. They argued that on the afternoon of September 17, Ted had simply miscalculated his dosage, taking a lethal, accidental combination of downers that caused his respiratory system to shut down naturally. Regarding the midnight trip to the Pahrump Desert, the defense argued that Rick Tabish was being unfairly vilified for fulfilling a dying man's wish. They produced a typed, albeit unsigned, note allegedly authorized by Ted, stating that Tabish was responsible for the safekeeping of the silver in the event of Ted's demise. They argued that Tabish knew the Binion family would immediately freeze all assets and cut off access to the wealth, and he was simply trying to honor his friend's final instructions before the corporate lawyers took over. For 6 grueling weeks, the jury was bombarded with conflicting medical testimonies, tales of secret casino operations, and sordid details of the Tabish-Murphy love affair. The public was deeply divided. Was it a cold-blooded murder for a buried fortune, or was it the tragic, predictable end of an unhinged casino prince? On May 19, 2000, amid a sea of flashing camera bulbs and a packed, silent courtroom, the jury returned. The tension was palpable as the foreman handed the verdicts to the clerk. Guilty of first-degree murder, guilty of burglary, guilty of grand larceny. Sandy Murphy collapsed into her defense attorney's arms, weeping hysterically, her face buried in her hands. Rick Tabish remained completely stoic, his jaw clenched as the verdicts were read. A few weeks later, the judge handed down the sentences. Sandy Murphy was condemned to 22 years to life in a maximum security prison. Rick Tabish received an identical life sentence, ensuring that the young lovers would spend the remainder of their adult lives behind cold steel bars. The Binion family expressed relief, and the public assumed the book was firmly closed on the most sensational crime in Nevada history. But in a city built on the unpredictable roll of the dice, the house doesn't always win on the first turn. Act 6, The House Reshuffles. For 4 long years, Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish sat in separate Nevada penitentiaries, adjusting to the grim reality of life sentences. Their legal teams, however, were quietly working behind the scenes, combing through thousands of pages of trial transcripts, looking for a fatal flaw in the state's victory. In July of 2004, they found it. The Nevada Supreme Court reviewed the original trial records and issued a stunning, unanimous ruling that sent shockwaves through the American legal system. The murder convictions of Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish were officially overturned. The High Court determined that the original trial judge, Joseph Bonaventure, had committed a series of severe, unconstitutional judicial errors that had fundamentally compromised the defendant's right to a fair trial. Crucially, the Supreme Court ruled that the judge had improperly allowed the prosecution to introduce highly prejudicial hearsay evidence, specifically Ted's ominous phone call to his attorney saying, "If I'm dead, you'll know why. Under the law, because Ted was not available to be cross-examined, that statement should never have been used to prove a murder plot. Furthermore, the High Court ruled that the judge had made a catastrophic error by failing to separate the violent murder charges from the property theft charges. By trying the Pahrump Silver heist and the Palomino Lane murder together in a single trial, the jury was inherently biased. The jurors saw the undeniable video evidence of Tabish stealing the silver in the desert and automatically assumed he must be guilty of the murder as well. The state was forced to start from scratch. Sandy Murphy and Rick Tabish were granted a brand new trial, and in October of 2004, the media circus descended upon Las Vegas once more. The courtrooms were identical, the cameras were back, but the legal momentum had completely reversed. For the second trial, the defense team spared no expense. They retained a dream team of forensic experts led by the world-renowned celebrity pathologist Dr. Michael Barden, former chief medical examiner for the city of New York. Dr. Barden launched a relentless, scientific assault on the prosecution's medical narrative, completely undermining Dr. Sim's initial findings. Dr. Barden walked the new jury through a detailed, clinical analysis of Ted Binion's stomach contents. He proved that the concentration of undigested heroin and Xanax remaining inside Ted's digestive tract was so astronomically high that it was mathematically impossible for the drugs to have been forced down his throat against his will. If a person is being suffocated or forced to drink poison, their natural gag reflex triggers massive, violent vomiting and deep tissue tearing inside the esophagus. None of these trauma markers were present on Ted's throat. Barden argued with absolute scientific authority that Ted had to have swallowed the massive lethal dose entirely voluntarily, either in a desperate attempt to achieve a profound high, or as a deliberate act of suicide brought on by the loss of his gaming license and his overwhelming paranoia. The defense team also introduced a dramatic physical demonstration. They constructed a life-sized replica of Ted's den furniture directly inside the courtroom. They demonstrated to the jury that if a large muscular man like Rick Tabish had engaged in a violent life-or-death struggle to burk or suffocate a wild, paranoid individual like Ted Binion, the struggle would have left unmistakable, massive defensive wounds on Ted's hands, fractured ribs, and deep scuff marks on the surrounding walls. Ted's body, however, had clean fingernails with absolutely no DNA from Tabish or Murphy underneath them. The defense successfully shifted the burden of proof back onto the state. They didn't have to prove that Sandy and Rick were innocent. They merely had to prove that the prosecution could not definitively state how Ted Binion died. They injected deep, unshakable, reasonable doubt into the core of the case. Late on a gray afternoon in November of 2004, after days of intense deliberation, the second jury emerged. The courtroom held its collective breath. The clerk took the paperwork and read the verdicts aloud. Not guilty of murder, not guilty of conspiracy to commit murder. Sandy Murphy burst into tears of joy, hugging her attorneys as her family cheered from the gallery. Rick Tabish closed his eyes, exhaling a long, deep breath of relief. The state's murder case had completely collapsed. However, the state of Nevada did not forgive the Midnight Desert excursion. While they walked away from the homicide charges, their original convictions for grand larceny, conspiracy to commit grand larceny, and burglary regarding the $6 million silver theft remained fully intact. The jury found that the Midnight excavation was an undeniable act of theft. Because Sandy Murphy had already served nearly 5 years in a maximum security prison, well exceeding the standard sentence for a first-time property theft conviction, she was released into the afternoon sun almost immediately, a free woman. Rick Tabish, due to his prior financial complications and his role as the ringleader of the excavation crew, was ordered to serve a few more years behind bars. He remained a model prisoner, ultimately gaining his total parole and absolute freedom in 2010. The legal battle was over, but the true mystery of the Binion fortune was just beginning. Act 7, The Ghost of the Binion Hoard. Today, the dust has long since settled on Fremont Street. The iconic Binion's Horseshoe Casino has changed corporate hands multiple times, its classic neon sign preserved as a vintage relic of a bygone era. The age of the wild, gun-totting cowboy casino barons who ruled Las Vegas with handshakes, raw cash, and backyard muscle is officially dead. It has been entirely replaced by sleek corporate boardrooms, glass mega-resorts, and clinical, data-driven risk management algorithms. Following her dramatic release, Sandy Murphy relocated to the West Coast, legally changed her name, married a wealthy corporate executive, and vanished entirely into a quiet, private suburban life far removed from the flashing cameras and sordid headlines of her youth. Rick Tabish returned to his native Montana. He quietly rebuilt his life, establishing a successful, low-profile commercial contracting and transportation operation, maintaining to this very day his absolute innocence regarding the death of his former friend. But the most haunting, enduring aspect of the Ted Binion saga isn't the courtroom drama, the ruined reputations, or the shattered families. It is the treasure itself. When forensic accountants, IRS agents, and local authorities finally tallied up the exact weight and face value of the silver recovered from the bed of Tabish's dump truck and the concrete bunker in Pahrump, they realized the mathematical ledger was fundamentally broken. Ted Binion was an incredibly meticulous record keeper when it came to his precious metals. His handwritten journals, locked away in a private safe at Palomino Lane, coupled with sworn testimonies from his closest casino vault managers, indicated that the subterranean Pahrump vault was meant to hold far more than just industrial silver bars. According to Ted's own manifests, the vault was supposed to house a staggering fortune in rare, irreplaceable gold coins, antique paper currency from the Civil War era, and tens of thousands of those historic, uncirculated Carson City silver dollars, a prize known across the numismatic world as the legendary Binion Hoard. When the concrete bunker was officially drained and cleared by the state executor, that massive portion of the treasure, estimated to be worth anywhere from $2 to $5 million in collector value, was completely missing. It was not in the dump truck, it was not hidden inside the Palomino Lane mansion, and it was never recovered by any law enforcement agency in the world. To this very day, persistent, tantalizing whispers travel through the dim dive bars, smoky poker rooms, and off-grid desert camps of Nevada. The local legend says that Rick Tabish and his crew were not the only ones who went digging in the desert, or that Ted had constructed a second, entirely secret decoy vault that has never been mapped. The belief remains that millions of dollars in pristine, historic gold and silver coins remain buried out there, somewhere beneath the cracked, sun-baked clay of the Pahrump Valley. Every few years, Nye County Sheriff deputies still find fresh, illegally excavated holes left behind in the dead of night by hopeful treasure hunters armed with high-end metal detectors, ground-penetrating radar, and old, hand-drawn maps purchased in the dark corners of the internet. Ted Binion lived his chaotic, high-stakes life by an unyielding law of the old desert. Keep your friends close, your enemies closer, and your money deep in the ground where no one can find it. In the end, the Mojave Desert respected his wishes. It swallowed his secrets and buried his truth, leaving behind an indelible American legacy of flashing neon, spilled blood, and a missing fortune hidden forever beneath the shifting Nevada sands. The desert still holds its secrets. Do you think the missing millions from the Binion Hoard will ever be found, or did someone walk away with the treasure undetected? Drop your theories below. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and leave your comment below what you thought. Thanks for watching.